Here we are discussing the top 6 excuses first-time, non-technical, self-funded founders give for why they can't get started on their software idea now. And one of the most common questions that we receive is, when's the right time to start building my app? Look, I get it. Timing can definitely feel like a big thing when it comes to building and launching your application. You definitely don't want to move too soon, but you also don't want to wait too long and miss the boat. I'm sure if you're anything like myself, you have had over the years a ton of different ideas for apps that you thought could have been successful, only for you to wait, miss the boat, and end up seeing someone else go ahead and bring that same idea to market years later, right? It's a super common phenomenon. So let's break this down logically. I want to show you why the whole idea of perfect timing is really just a myth. But before we get into that, I'm sure if you're new here, you may be wondering who I am and how do I know what I'm talking about. My name is Timothy John Uzebu. I'm the co-founder here at Benmore Technologies, right? We specialize in helping non-technical, self-funded founders turn their ideas into real functional software applications. Over the year, we've worked with startups in all kinds of industries, including healthcare, real estate, marketing, logistics, you name it, right? The apps that we built have gone on to raise money from investors, bring in millions of dollars in revenue, partner with companies like Microsoft, JP Morgan, and more, and serve tens of thousands of users around the world, including companies like the New York Times, Toronto Raptors, and Google, right? So that being said, safe to say that we know a thing or two about building software applications for non-technical founders. Now, today, like I said, we're going to dive into one very important topic regarding timing, right? Timing of getting started once you have that spark of inspiration and how to go forward from there. So let's go ahead and break down the myth of perfect timing in a logical kind of step-by-step manner. So of course, the truth is there's no such thing as perfect timing in the world of software and the world at large, right? People tend to think they need to have all these conditions lined up in order to get the ball rolling. That's enough budget, a fully fleshed out idea, or a quote unquote ready market. But typically that mindset will just go ahead and hold you back, right? If you wait for perfect conditions, you're not just waiting, you're typically losing opportunity, right? And I understand that does definitely feel safer, right? To go ahead and wait for all these perfect storm conditions to fall in place. You're probably thinking right now you're too busy, or you don't have a patent yet for the idea. Maybe your business entity isn't fully set up yet. You don't even know if the idea is viable. You haven't had all the money and the funds gathered yet, and you don't have investors. Of course, these are all super valid concerns. The reason why I have these listed out is because over the past few years, having conversations with hundreds of different founders and prospective founders, these are the top 6 that we've heard, right? But the truth is, waiting will not actually solve any of these problems. In fact, it typically makes things worse. So kind of let's go ahead and break down each of these step by step. So the first one, and one of the more common ones that we hear is, I'm too busy, right? Here the thing is, starting doesn't mean that you have to drop everything and dive headfirst into development, right? In fact, in the early stages of building an app, planning, validating, and scoping are more about working smarter as opposed to working harder. What we want to do is take small, manageable steps now. That way you're able to spread your time and really have it be pointed and affected towards the most high value outcomes within the early stages of your idea, right? Like planting a tree, it's the sooner you start, the sooner you see growth. Especially when it comes to building an application, the sooner you start, the sooner you're able to go ahead and plan, validate, and prove your assumptions wrong so that you're able to be less wrong over time. Again, that is the name of the game when it comes to software. Whenever you have an idea, even if it's the best idea in the world, you have to be operating off the assumptions that you are wrong, right? And so the name of the game is not to wait for the perfect conditions. The name of the game is to go ahead and find information and produce information through action so that you're able to be less wrong faster, right? That is the name of the game. You're not trying to be perfect. You're trying to understand where you are wrong so you can actually go ahead and address that. Now, one real world example of someone who had a valid excuse, like yourself, as far as them being too busy, is Guillermo Sanchez. He was and is the founder of Publitas. Publitas is a software platform that helps businesses create and publish digital catalogs and brochures, right? It's used by retail brands to deliver engaging, shoppable experiences online, essentially bridging traditional paper catalogs into interactive web-based content. Now, Guillermo was working full-time as a consultant at Deloitte, and he ended up going and pursuing Publitas as a side project. Now, initially, he actually went ahead and manually created the digital catalogs for clients, giving them the impression that the software was doing all the work on the back end, because he understood he didn't have the time and the resources to invest full-fledged from day one, but he wanted to understand where he was wrong in his assumptions about the quality, about the actual value that the proposed software was given to the end user. And he wanted to go ahead and validate that, or really invalidate that, as soon as he possibly could, right? That is the name of the game. Number two, when we hear semi-often, is I don't have a patent, right? Many founders are worrying about protecting their idea before they even start, but the reality is patents are primarily at this stage a bottleneck for success and progress. If we're being honest, right, less than 1% of the time is this even relevant of a conversation. And if it is, they're usually used to make an already successful product more defensible, right? Not at the start. Instead of investing months or years into chasing patents or patent lawyers, the goal should just be to go ahead and build something. Even if people steal it, that's not a big deal, especially at the beginning. That way you're able to work towards validating or invalidating your initial hypothesis, getting the actual application in users' hands, and generating sales, right? That's the most important parts, early stages of an application. Number three is that your business entity isn't fully set up, right? The thing is, in order to begin an application, you don't need an LLC, right? Because like I said, in the beginning stages, your only goal is to validate or invalidate your hypothesis with an MVP, right? So in order to do that, you don't need a business entity set up. Worst case, you can run it as a sole proprietor. However, in some situations, right, you want to go ahead and, for tax reasons, you already know that you're going to put some sort of investments into this thing, then it makes sense to have that fully set up. But if you're just going to start as lean as possible, you don't need to have a business entity set up. Now, point number four is that I'm not sure if my idea is viable, right? This is actually by far the best reason to start now, because the purpose of starting and the purpose of the MVP, like I said earlier, is not to build a final version. It's to test whether or not your idea works in the real world, right? So you want to go ahead and start as small as you can and start actually gathering data to adjust your approach and minimize risk. Let's imagine, for example, I have an idea that I want to go ahead and sell, mason jars, right, to beekeepers per se. Let's say I waited a year to go ahead and have this patent set up for this brand new type of jar that was, leverage, state-of-the-art technology. I had to get my business entity set up, all this. I'm a year and a half in, now 2 years in, I have everything fully set up, right? I go ahead and get this first one produced and go to sell it just to find out these beekeepers don't need it, right? They already have something that works just fine for them, right? As opposed to doing that, what you should do instead is just, hey, go ahead and have conversations. Maybe have some mock-ups done, some designs. Maybe just have one really rough jar that you're able to produce and get their feedback from there, right? Like I was saying, the whole point of this is to validate or invalidate rather, and become less wrong over time, much faster. So skipping all these different excuses that aren't super important in the beginning, right? Number five is you don't have all the funds right now, right? Here's the thing, you don't need the entire budget up front. The truth is you'll never have all the funds anyway, because if your app is a success, it'll never stop costing you money, right, to build new features and maintaining it, right? That's because building software is a step-by-step process, and you don't need to tackle it all at once. Here at Benmore, we actually have a specialized process to help founders like you get started with that, what you have, while giving you everything you need to secure the additional funding to move forward confidently. So I'm gonna break that down in a bit here. So how our discovery process works, we start off with a small upfront investment that covers research, design, and prototyping. Essentially, as far as what we do for you, we go ahead and create Figma designs, or essentially clickable, high-fidelity designs of your application in order to simulate the actual user experience, showing us exactly how the app will look and function once it is built in the future, right? Now, leveraging Figma, we're able to go ahead and have these designs in a much faster, much more cost-effective manner than investing tons of resources upfront into the actual development of the app without even showing this to you or showing it to the users and getting their feedback. Number two is we go ahead and do qualitative market research. We want to understand the competitive landscape, who your target audience is, and the problem your app is aiming to solve. This helps us validate your idea and ensures you're actually building something that people want. Number three, outlining the technical requirements, the costs, timelines, and then combining all this information to actually estimate the timeline and the budget needed to actually go ahead and build out the MVP. Now the question is, how could you actually use this to go ahead and leverage and raise funds? The very first thing is to just gauge interest with potential early adopters, right? Like I said, once you have those Figma designs in that prototype, you can actually start to schedule demos with potential customers or users. Again, you don't need to have the full app finished to be able to start selling that vision. You want to use lead generation methods like cold email, cold calling, LinkedIn, referrals, things of that nature to get meetings with your preferred audience and see if they resonate with the actual designs, the prototype, and be able to go from there, right? During those meetings, you want to walk those customers through the actual designs and then gather their thoughts, right? If the feedback is positive, what you can do is ask those early adopters to sign a LOI or a letter of intent, which essentially just outlines their willingness and commitments to actually use and purchase the software once it's built out, right? So you go like, hey, if we do build this out for you, would you be willing to commit X amount of dollars to be able to use it, right? Capture that in an LOI. You won't pay a cent until it's live. That way they know it's fully risk-free. Now, once you have a critical mass of LOIs from your early adopters, you actually leverage that to pitch to investors, capital allocators, strategic partners, things of that nature to go ahead and get the capital influx that you need to actually go ahead and develop the application. Now, why this works for self-funded founders is because you don't have to have the full investment for development up front, right? You can actually go ahead and leverage prototypes, research, designs, and lead generation tactics to have conversations with your target market, and then leverage the results of that to either iterate further on the product, right, to make sure that it's actually solving a pain point that people would commit to paying for, or from there, once you have those, leverage that information to come back to investors and get some capital allocated into your project. Now, if this is something that you'd be interested in, you can go ahead in the description of this video and click a link to call with our team. We'll walk you through the step-by-step and see if you're a good fit. Now, I know some of you might be thinking, yeah, I have one of these excuses, but my situation is different, right? It's a valid excuse because, insert reason here. Typically, from the conversations that I've had, people are just a bit afraid to commit to getting started, right? Obviously, this is a new venture for most individuals, especially those who are non-technical, especially those who have never launched an application before. It's uncharted territories, right? And so we're leaning on valid excuses, right, that are actually valid. Like you said, not having a patent, not having funds, not having investors. These are all valid excuses. But the goal here is not to have excuses, right? The goal is to actually go ahead and get started and start to develop this application, which can go ahead and change your industry, change the way that things are being done, and it really is make an impact, right? And looking back on the individuals that we've worked with here at Benmore, all of those who have gone on to build their products and be successful have had some of these hurdles, right? And many times they were facing things that were objectively far more valid, right? Far worse as far as situations than what you probably have. You had individuals who were low on funds or who had been scammed by developers overseas in the past. Individuals who were waiting on potential funds from their investors. Individuals who were dealing with the loss of a close relative or recently married, right? Those who were busy with their other businesses that they were already running, or even battling illnesses, right? And injuries, that things are really, really serious. And of course, the list goes on, but the biggest thing about them is that they didn't wait for the stars to align. They understood the name of the game with software is starting small and iterating so that you're less wrong over time as fast as possible, right? So if that sounds like something you want to do, like I said, go ahead in the description, call to speak with our team. More than happy to walk you through what our process looks like and how we can formalize and really come to an agreement on what the best path is for you as far as getting started here. If that's not something you want to do right now, you can obviously go through on our LinkedIn, on our newsletter, on our website, and on this YouTube channel, click through some more of our content, maybe listen to some of our client interviews and see kind of what their process was from A to Z when it came to ideation, research, design, and building their prototype and launching and scaling from there.